As a business owner, we get a lot of advice. People always want to help us with their advice. Some of the best advice I ever got was don't take advice from people who aren't willing to invest in the advice they give you. And that's always been a good standard for me. But today, we have a real treat. We're going to learn how to filter the best advice. Our guest, Benjamin Friedman, is with us. Some interesting points about Benjamin here. He's been doing business in operations and finance with various startups over decades. He wrote a 500-page book, and it's really cool. It's divided into different modules across the business, operation, administration, of how to grow your company. And he runs his own business doing fractional COO work. He'll help you with projects, anything that will help you grow quickly and efficiently. But before we meet Benjamin, let's get into this. Welcome to the Key Hire Small Business Podcast, where we cover issues that help owners scale their small business. I'm Corey Harlock, creator of Key Hire Solutions, where we like to help Texas small business grow with our talent, and I'll be your host today. So without further ado, let's bring Benjamin onto the show.
Hi, Corey. How's it going?
Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
We're doing good, man. Thanks for being with us. So we're going to talk about advice, and I'm sure, and everyone likes to give advice, right?
Yes, certainly. And as you mentioned in the intro, any business owner is going to hear a ton of advice, both solicited and often unsolicited.
In your opinion, is the unsolicited, what percentage of advice people get would be unsolicited?
So it's interesting. We're going to really dig into this because I know we made a blood pact to be very practical in this episode.
Correct. Yeah, that's part of the
so
deal.
we're definitely going to go there. I would encourage founders to actively seek a lot of advice. We'll talk more about that. So if founders are following that advice, I would say probably 75-25. But
Right.
if you're sitting back, I'd say pretty much everyone you run into has an idea for your next business, your current business, what you did wrong, what you should do right, etc. And it's probably like 80-20 of unsolicited advice.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And so one of our first question always is, what is it? And I kind of feel silly asking, like, how would you define advice, or the different kind of forums where you would get it? But, I always like to ask the dumb questions, because sometimes we might not know we're getting advice when we are, and sometimes we might take things advice when they're not. So maybe lay out kind of, give us the overarching view of, what we're talking about when we talk about receiving and kind of shifting through pieces of advice or information we're getting.
Sure, Corey. No, I was thinking that for the Key Hire broadcast, I need to come up with a phrase that could possibly be copywritten when we're done. So I'll let you have it if you like it. But it's the idea of a feedback paradox. And the paradox is, as a small business owner, you're going to constantly get feedback from countless people, as we discussed. However, at the same time, the best advice can come from anyone at any time. And you really don't know who is going to give you that piece of advice that's going to help you transform your company into the success that you're looking for. So you have to really remain open to feedback from various and diverse sources. So that's what I'm hoping we get into here, is this paradox of getting a lot of feedback, but filtering it through to suit your purposes as best as possible.
That's awesome. So I don't talk about my wife often on this podcast, but she's a woman in a man's world, and one of her favorite cartoons, because this will happen. I'll tell you the cartoon, and then we'll talk about kind of the situation. But there's a cartoon that says, "Hey, that's a great idea. I wish one of the guys at the table had a thought of it." Right. And so oftentimes, and it doesn't have to be a gender thing, but someone will bring up an idea in a meeting, and the group think is going, and it gets shot down. Then 2 weeks later, someone has an amazing idea, and it was very clearly brought up before, but the person who brought it up, whoever they were, didn't get recognition for it because for whatever reason, it wasn't heard, or it didn't sink in, or it didn't resonate at that time, right? Because, and so maybe one of the sneaky questions I'm asking here is, how do you prepare yourself to receive information and suggestions. Do you know what I'm talking about? Those kind of boardroom table conversations, or people are going down a path and then you throw out an idea that maybe takes them in a different direction, but it doesn't land because they're not in a space, or they're kind of so focused on something else that they don't hear it.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense, Corey. And it's interesting. We all have a number of unconscious biases that affect how we think and process information. That could be a whole separate
really?
podcast.
Yeah. I don't think.
But to your point, that information is flowing constantly. I think it's really toggling your leadership bandwidth to always include a certain amount of strategic time. So you mentioned a circumstance where it's in the middle of a meeting, people are batting around ideas. Maybe you're catching it, maybe you're not. Maybe one solution there, if you're in a ton of meetings, maybe it's whether it's AI or a human capturing the notes from the meeting and maybe having a category of ideas so that when you look at it later, you're not attributing it to someone or a certain context. You're able to look at that idea. And then my point about thinking strategically is always blocking out time every week and a good chunk of time once a month. Maybe that's a whole day where you're thinking about how to grow the business. Your mind is on the business, not in the business.
Right.
So you're putting email aside, you're putting your day-to-day aside. You might have to tell your family you're offline for a little bit, and you're really just focusing about the future of the business and using some of that time to go back and filter through some of these ideas to see how they hit you. So those are a couple of reactions.
Awesome. So, the format, we always like to go to we've kind of defined what that is. What is advice? What does it look like? So now if we go forward into this, what are some of the mistakes? And you kind of just alluded to a few that I thought were pretty interesting, but in your world, if people latch on to something that maybe isn't the right piece of information, or they miss the right piece of information, in your experience kind of coaching people through this and your experiences doing startups, I'm sure we've all missed good advice and we've all taken bad advice. What are those mistakes that people make that make them susceptible to missing or choosing the wrong things?
Right. So I'd say the first thing, Corey, is to know thyself. It's an ancient Greek expression. It's over a couple thousand years old. It still applies, and particularly to business owners. I've met a lot of business owners and startup founders who seem to be in the business because they were driven by somebody else. Maybe their parents or family pushed them in that direction. Maybe they're doing it as an antagonism, contrarian lifestyle to everybody telling them to act a certain way. But it's this external focus. And so I talk to business owners about really thinking about what's important to you and what direction you want to head as the basis for making any decisions. And most importantly, in this context, it's being able to take in various ideas and put them in context. And I have a couple others, but if you want to ask a question on that first.
So I think one of my favorite expressions is, I think I heard what you thought you said, was, just kind of not being clear or doing things pushing against the norms, or not being clear on your vision is kind of maybe a mistake. We talk about second, third generation owners a lot because that seems to be a real tough situation when business has been running status quo by a matriarch or a patriarch of the family. They hand that off to a second gen, and it's been a $20 million a year business, and here comes a second generation owner with their MBA, and they're ready to put this thing, put rockets on it and take it to the moon. But we still have all these legacy employees and all this resistance and all these constraints pushing it forward. Sometimes that advice, what I think I'm hearing is just kind of like, if you're just doing something because you're pushing against the norms or you don't have a clear vision, you might latch on to something that isn't the best idea.
That's right. You want to be consistent with your vision and your values in any decisions. And if you're not clear on those, and so to use your case, there's a second generation who really wants to take the business in a fuller direction, to exponentially grow it, say, there are also probably second generation, third generation owners who very much are in the business because they've been told since they were born that they be in the business. And so I think this advice applies to them as well. Make
Awesome.
sure that you want to be in the business, because otherwise you'll be chasing false metrics. And instead of like really being in there to grow the business because it's important to you, because you're struggling and you're always thinking about how to do better, how to solve problems, whatever really drives you. Instead, you'll be doing it because you feel like you should be doing it. And these
Yeah,
shoulds
that makes
are very
sense.
onerous.
Okay, what else you got, Benjamin?
Yeah, so I think it's really making sure that you're getting a lot of feedback, but you're also balancing that with a number and a period of solicitations. So we talked jokingly at the beginning about people coming up to us with all sorts of ideas, but there are going to be instances where you're ready to change the company, you're ready to try out a new idea, a new product line, a new service offering, and you do want to get feedback from your team, from customers, from people you respect, people you trust, but you also want to make sure you limit that. And so you might say, okay, for the next 2 weeks, I'll be soliciting feedback. But after that, even if there's 100 more people I could ask, I have to stop, because the worst decision would be to not decide, to just keep staying in that feedback mode.
So in addition to that, what we do at Key Hire is when we include people in the process is we say, you always got to include your best people. Don't include poor performers or underachievers in a hiring decision, because as you mentioned, their motivation might be a little different than the top performers, right? If you're going to bring in a leader who's going to hold people accountable and you put a poor performer in front of them and they think, oh, this person could make my life miserable, they're going to approach this. Their feedback will be a lot different than the high performer who thinks this person's going to get the best out of me. And so I'm curious to know if so for fun, let's use a manufacturing facility and they've rigged up a prototype of a new product. Would you include everyone in that, or how would you select the people that you want feedback from, or would you just get it from everyone? How would you look at that?
So I would look at a cross section of the company. So in that instance, let's say there's already an established customer base. There are long-standing customers. Maybe there are key customers. Certainly they're part of the discussion. If you have suppliers or vendors who are important to the business, I would like to ask them for their feedback, because on the one hand, they know the business, but on the other hand, they don't have an emotional vesting in the outcome. And then finally, yes, I would ask a cross section of the team. So a certain number of managers, directors, and also people on the line, because they're going to be thinking about this proposition from different angles. And
Right.
That's what you want. You don't want to create something that is great in theory, but is going to be stuck in the machines, if you will. And so maybe somebody on the line will say, oh, that's a great idea, but we can't do it. And here's why. And then, maybe it's insurmountable, maybe not, but you'll be really glad you got their feedback.
So I can hear some of my clients, past and present, in my brain saying, Corey, I don't have time to do all that stuff. So how big is this process, right? And I always like to kind of put parameters on things so people can go, oh, that's not so bad. Maybe I should be doing that.
Right. So I would always build a process that is proportional to the change you're making. So for example, if you're a manufacturing company and you are making widget A and now you're going to start making widget B, and you see that as the future of the entire company, I would have a very long and thoughtful process, still very time defined, but maybe it's a matter of a couple months or even 3 months.
Right.
If it's some smaller change, a key hire to your point earlier, a tweak in the process, rolling out a new product, I would keep that to be a much shorter timeline, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, for example.
So if it's an add-on product that might be 10, 15% of your business, then that would be but if you're looking to transition your entire business, that would be different. That would be more in depth.
That's right. That's right. And I know we're trying to be very concise and fast moving in this discussion, but when I'm talking to small business owners, I really want them to understand the payoff for making a small investment of time now versus a lot of time down the road. If we don't think through the repercussions, we could spend months and a ton of money recovering from mistakes made. And so I'll put that trade-off in front of them readily.
And I love that. And that's our whole philosophy here too. Like if we do the work up front, then we're maximizing the probability of success down the road, and valuing your time and minimizing the time investment to get things right. And so I agree with that. Kind of putting the work up front is always seems like a hard thing to do, but when you define it and follow it, you always look back thinking, man, I'm glad I did that. I'm glad we invested the time in the beginning, because we rolled it out. Whatever we're doing, we're rolling out this feedback process. We were able to think through and include some things that really helped us get a hold of what we're trying to do.
Right. Totally agree.
And was there anything else on the mistakes made side of things, Benjamin?
Yeah, so I think there's one more to consider. It's the analysis paralysis. I think there's a spectrum between people who act without thinking and people who think without acting. And we want to find our place in the middle where we give this some thought. It's in a constraint of a certain amount of time, a certain number of people, and then a decision will be made. And I talk to small business owners a lot about a growth mindset, so that we're out there. Eventually, we're going to have to take action. Sometimes we'll have to take a lot of actions depending on the business. We're in the business of learning and improving. We're not in the business of perfection. I don't know anybody out there who's perfect. Maybe you've run into him, Corey, but I certainly have not. So,
I tell you, he's not on this podcast. That's for sure. People, I'm not talking about you.
No, I agree. I thought you were. No, no, I think so. The important thing is we have to learn from everything we're doing. And if we take the mindset of we're here to grow and to keep getting better, then we're going to say, let's put a little bit of thought into this, again, proportional to the impact of the decision. And then we're going to move forward and we're going to calibrate what we're learning. And we're going to use metrics. We're going to use other types of feedback besides, people talking to us. And we're going to see, is this exactly the direction we want to be going? But it all starts with making that decision after a little bit of thought.
So I have two comments / questions. So number one is, I know there's also a category of people that do the analysis paralysis, then make a decision, but then assume everyone else has been a part of that analysis paralysis. So they've already in their mind decided to go, where people around them think they're still in the brainstorming world. Have you ever come across that?
Very much. And this really touches on the importance of communication, probably in everything we do, certainly in what you're doing, what I'm doing. Communication is critical. And if you are running this project or you're one of the key stakeholders in this project, you really want to be clear about communicating from the outset your goal, what you're trying to accomplish, who's going to be involved, how long the decision is going to take. You may want to give an update or two in the middle, depending on how long the process is. And then at the quote unquote end of the process, you want to come back to people and say, this is what was done and this was what was decided. And the reason I put that in quotes, the word end, is because there should be a cycle of feedback where people are constantly coming to you and saying, oh, this is working the way I wanted, or more likely, people will come to you and say, this is not working the way I wanted. And maybe they have an idea to improve it, or maybe they have a concern that nobody thought of before, but it is this cycle. And finally, if you're communicating that we're all working together, trying to learn, trying to grow, try to improve, and so come to me with that feedback, good or bad, that's going to perpetuate people coming up with new ideas and other ways to grow the company. So you're setting a high standard here, but that's really going to pay dividends off for the company down the road.
Okay, that's cool. Now, here's the second question I had, or comment. We're talking about manufacturing. So a client comes and says, hey, could you make me this? It's maybe a variation of what you do. Maybe it's a smaller, cheaper, less profit margin of what you do. And so you make it for them. And they say, man, that was great. You should really get into the business of making these. And it's almost a diversion from what you're doing. It's a distraction. But because we just got a quick win, we think, oh, let's do this. This is amazing. And then so you throw some energy into it, and then you realize, no, that was the only person who wanted it, and they don't need any more. And now we have all this extra stuff. Have you ever come across something like that? And what kind of how do you filter through that or not make that mistake?
Yeah, so this is a great example, Corey. I think this really gets into the ideal opportunity to experiment. So you were creating this widget for the client. Presumably, they paid you for it.
Yeah,
so,
of course. Yeah. They paid you the first time. Yeah.
Yeah. So in that case, this is great because now they're paying for your experiment and they say, oh, I love this. Okay, well, perfect. You can now take that widget to your other customers and say, hey, I want to provide this to you for free, or here's one, I'm not going to give it for the whole company, but here's one to try out, or come over, or I'll come over to your office, I'll show it to you, etc. You're doing this in ways where you're not really risking a lot, but you're soliciting feedback. Now, in your scenario, it didn't work out, and that's fine. You spent a little bit of time, but you've already built this. Most of the costs were already covered, and the experiment was worth it because you found out it didn't work out for anyone else, but it did for this client, and they already paid for it. In other cases, you might be the next Slack. They started off as a small gaming company that was destined to fail as a gaming company, but they had this really cool internal communication system, and somebody said, hey, you know what we have here? This is the best thing we have going right now is this way to communicate with each other. We should market that. Right. And now we've all heard of Slack. Yeah. Amazon starting as a bookstore, didn't conceive of AWS at the time. There it is. Google never thought they'd be a search engine primarily, but that's how they made a ton of money. So these experiments are really healthy for a small business. So I think that's a great example. And in that case, it didn't work, but it's definitely worth a small investment of time and money to run those experiments because that could be your next exponential growth pattern.
Yeah. Now, what about the other side of that? Because I know sometimes as business owners, we get a quick win and we get addicted to the quick win, right? Like we had someone on the podcast a while back. I think it was Jeff Koziak, but we're talking about doing these quick and dirty little easy introductions, sell introductions to get your foot in the door that cost very little, and they're almost like a lost leader. And Matt, who was that? It wasn't Jeff. Was it Craig? Anyway, throw them in the chat once you figure out who we're talking about, because I don't want to mislabel them. But the question I had was, that's great, but what if you get addicted to these easy wins? Because selling the big ticket item is hard, right? Going to market, if you've been grinding on your initial widget and like sales is slow and hard, and then you get this new shiny thing going on that people are asking you for. It's hard. It's easy to get focused over there, like, oh, this is the next big thing because they're asking us. I don't even have to sell it, right? And then we lose our focus and we get addicted to that quick win. Is that, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it feels like it's a mistake. And I'm just wondering if it's something you've encountered and had to kind of back anyone off.
So yes, definitely. The hallmark of a successful business owner includes being able to innovate and being able to accept a high level of risk. And so in your scenario, there's all these ideas coming. And so the first idea they use to build a business, well, maybe they think the second, third, fourth, etc., also are ideas which can be used to build a business. And then someone like you or me or somebody in the leadership team has to provide a perspective of, we have to balance this. We do want to take a certain amount of risk. That's healthy in order to grow. As people, we need to take risk in order to enjoy life and to push ourselves. And as businesses, we have to take risks. But we want those to be small, mitigated, defined. And if it's something that looks like it can really take off, oh, great. Then let's really have a discussion about a spinoff where we have verified that new business is capable of sustaining itself. Maybe it needs a small investment, but there's already people lining up to pay for it. Okay, great. That needs to be a calculated separate business, but you don't want it to confuse your existing business. And that's a tough conversation.
Well, I think we've even seen major, large companies that got caught drinking their own Kool-Aid, and then they tank, right? Because they take their eye off their primary offering, the one that people genuinely want, and they just get too excited about what they got going on. I mean, I'll go way back, but you remember the new Coke?
Yes, yes.
Like they just abandoned the old recipe, and they found out, man, people really like that old recipe, and it feels like they didn't do the research. They didn't know what they were doing.
It's interesting. I heard a little bit about that where they brought in a bunch of strong advocates. So these were people who already loved Coke. And I think their target market audience was so excited at the idea of a new product that they misrepresented the entire market. But that said, there actually was a value to Coke in the long run of the branding of everybody talking about the mistake of new Coke, everybody reinforcing how great the classic Coke is.
Right, classic. Yeah, now it's classic. That's right. Yeah.
I almost said old. And I was like, no, they call it a classic.
It is. I think the cans even say classic, but that's making lemonade, right? Like that was a big.
Yes, no, that's for sure.
Unless they're that far, unless they're playing chess and we're all playing checkers, and they're like, let's do this, and then when there's backlash, we can leverage it. But that would be a pretty gutsy move.
I think they were selling tickets to the checkers match.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, I agree. All right. So we kind of, that's been awesome. Like we've outlined a couple of really interesting scenarios that I know some of them I've been through. I've watched all my clients go through them. Some of them you've had as well. So we're going to get your information up on the board here in a minute, Benjamin, but let's talk about if you're sitting with a business owner and you could give them 1, 2, 3 tips that they could take back to their business today to start making or filtering out information to make better decisions, what would you tell them to do?
Sure. And Corey, I'm going to fly through these. So if you want to pause at the end and come back to any of them, but I recognize our time here. So I'm just
we got time. You're good. We're okay. Good. Yeah.
All right. So the first is we talked at the beginning about getting a lot of feedback unsolicited. Well, now I want to turn that around and say constructive feedback is critical to growth. So you do want to go out and get feedback from the people who really matter to the success of your business. That could be key staff. That could be your customers. That could be advisors. That could be vendors, probably a mix of all those. And you really want to push yourself beyond your comfort zone in order to learn. I would suggest that you start with one person a day. You approach them with the following. First, you say, I have used feedback in order to improve this way. And now I'm really hoping that you give me feedback, because that is table stakes for you saying, hey, I actually take in the feedback and I do something with it. I'm not just making small talk. The second is to ask open-ended questions. So for example, what's one thing I can be doing better, or what's one way I could have improved the meeting? And then at the end, this is really important, genuinely thank the person for their feedback, even if it's something you don't want to hear. Sometimes feedback is tough, but you always have to thank the person or they will never, ever want to give you feedback again. And sometimes that tough feedback really rings your ears, and then you come back to it a couple of days later and you know, damn it, that person was so right. I'm really respect that I heard that. Thank goodness you thanked them when you heard it, and you can go back and thank them again.
So what you're outlining, the word that came to my mind is it takes a good deal of humility. Yeah. Which is as a business owner, I think when you talk about changing their mindset, right? That growth mindset. In my experience, the business owners who get good at being humble often have the biggest successes. And to be able to say to someone, what do you think of my idea? And allowing them to say, I don't like it, with repercussion free, right? And being able to be honest and not being punished for it, or being allowed, having the courage to ask someone, what am I doing wrong? And listening to that. That is kind of a business owner who's on his way to doing great things. When you got that tunnel vision and you're so busy, right? We have that the key owner stages that we've developed, and it goes from the overwhelmed, to the curious, to the growing, to the strategic, and the unsures in there between the overwhelmed and the curious. And that is the evolution of the mindset, is as they get their head, they're able to rise up above the business and get out of the business, as you said, work on the business instead of in the business. It gives them that ability to be more humble and understand, like, look, I got a really good team of people under here. A lot of things have to line up, right? I got an amazing team that are doing better work than we've ever done before. I have more time than I've ever done because we have these amazing people. Now I can actually look and say, how could I get even better at this? Like, things are going great, but if I want to take it to the next level, how can I get better? And having the humility and the courage to ask people that, it takes humility and courage to be able to ask people that, right? And not have them feel like, oh, you better give me the right answer.
Right. No, I totally agree with what you're saying. We talked about the example of Slack earlier, where the leadership team was open to the idea. I'll give you a contra example. Imagine being in the C-suite at Kodak, and you have a small group of a few engineers who came up with this interesting idea of digital cameras. And you're sitting there in a C-suite going, well, this is Kodak. We live on film and our sales are better than ever before. And you decide collectively to reject that team that has built the digital camera. Well, that's a true story. It actually started at Kodak. They rejected the idea. I think we know the history between that decision and now. And so it's humility. It's also being open to the idea that's going to really take your business to a whole new level. And so I think if humility is possible, I strongly encourage it. If you tend to be more of the mind than of the heart, then use your mind to say there are going to be some amazing opportunities that are going to start with other people having the idea that catalyzes your business.
Yeah, that's well said. Thank you. That's perfect.
Oh, great. Great.
Any other advice?
Yeah, so Adam Grant started with this idea. He's an organizational psychologist who's worked with a lot of companies, and he talked about a challenge network. And a challenge network is very different than a support network. So a support network is friends and families who say that they love us, and no matter what we do, we can't go wrong. It's unconditional love. And that's great. I think we all need that. But a challenge network will push you to be a better person, and they will respect you. You might not always want to hang out and have a beer or a coffee with those people, but you definitely respect their opinion. And what's really important is that they have your best interests in mind, even if the tone or the style or the way it comes across may not feel like it at first. And so you want to think about who can be in your challenge network. Maybe it's 3 to 5 people. And the way I would order this is I would start with a specific challenge or obstacle in your business. I would go to people who can push you. I would think about people, maybe they're a couple of years down the path where you'd like to be, or maybe they have a perspective that you value from a customer you'd like to have in 5 years, or somebody you'd like on your team as a C-suite in 5 years. You want to make sure that that person is really listening to you and pushing you. Think of it, the difference between a coach and a drill sergeant. So a coach is trying to encourage you to do the best job possible. Even if they annoy you sometimes, they have your best interests at heart. A drill sergeant is there to make you a better person, yes, but they don't necessarily have your best interests at heart. And You have to think about that subtle difference. And then finally, constantly assess your network to make sure you have people in there who are pushing you and are available, and you can toggle people in and out as needed.
So one follow-up on that is, you're creating this group. Do you need to have some rules of engagement out there so everyone can stay within the lines and it doesn't get personal or insulting or too much or not the right time, or I've had enough, safe words so you can tap out if people are, how would you, because if you're going to put together a group of people to actively kind of rip and tear and challenge, that's got to be in my world, for me, for it to be effective, it would have to be really defined, because at one point I would, it's like, man, this is my baby, and you guys have been calling it ugly for like an hour now. Can I take a break? I need to, can we be done? how are the rules of engagement to setting up that kind of interaction?
So, yes, I would approach it the same way that as I would approach an experiment. So I would start very small, and then I would up the ante only if I'm seeing good results. So now bring that into this question. I would go to somebody who you're not quite sure how they're going to respond to you. I would go to them with a very specific question. It might not be a yes, no question, but it's a very tight parameter in that question and a limited amount of time. So say, hey, I'd like to pick your brain. Do you have 20 minutes or 30 minutes in order to discuss this question? And use that as a gauge. And if in those 20 minutes they're sort of trying to rip you a new one, even though you want to talk about a hyper specific question, then
Right.
you know that's probably not somebody who has your best interests. But if they take that small question and they sort of twist it, they look at it at a 90-degree angle, they think about your 3-year business plan, and then bring it back to that question, you go, oh my God, this is amazing. Can I, talk to you in the future? And then about once a quarter, come to them with a question, whether it's specific or broader.
And the other thing is with the time limit, if it's not going your way, you can call time, right? Well, that's our time. I'll have my people call your people. Thanks.
That's right. That's right.
Very cool.
You want to mitigate the risk of your self-confidence.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Benjamin, thank you so much. This has been great. So if people want to get in touch with you or want to get your hands on your material, how can we do that?
The website is www.webuildscalegrow.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn where I post weekly. And I have a book out there on Amazon. It's called Scale, Reach Your Peak.
Or available on Amazon. So just go to Amazon and put Scale, Reach Your Peak, and you'll see it there.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Awesome. This has been great, man. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I think there's some good information. I think we helped some business owners today. So I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Same here, Corey. This has been fantastic. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you. So there's Benjamin Friedman. We'd like to thank you for being on the show. We'd like to thank you for tuning into the Key Hire Small Business Podcast. If you got value out of the show today and you want to keep up to date on our new content, be sure to subscribe. If you like to watch your content, you can check us out. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel right here. If you prefer to listen to your podcast, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, whatever platform that is. Just search Key Hire Small Business Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about working with Key Hire and how we can help your small business grow, you can schedule a meeting right on our website. We're a help first organization, no sales, no weirdness, just help. I promise you. Thanks for listening. I'm Corey Harlock. I've been your host. Until next time, stop grinding, start growing.